Hello and welcome to Six Part. Today I'm gonna continue the series What If Deku Got the Power of Cyclops Part 2. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you'll never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Heroes did not particularly appeal to Dr. Shigaraki, as he was now known. How could he be? Despite the fact that his experiments were intended to make quirks stronger, he was viewed as a villain himself. Did he care if some of his test subjects passed away while undergoing the augmentation procedures? They left behind corpses from which he could still gather useful information. But Heroes created some of the best quirks he had ever seen. He shuddered with disgust at the thought. He genuinely detested heroes who failed to recognize the value of his genius. For more than 200 years, he had kept his research a secret because of this. In addition to enabling him to live a long life, his quirks also helped him avoid recognition. Indeed, Shigaraki possessed multiple quirks. Considering what had to be endured to acquire them, it was quite an accomplishment. Now he was functionally immortal, the result of centuries of long, hard labor. But it was insufficient. He was desperate for more. That's why he had treated his master like a god when he had appeared before him all those years ago. After all these long years, they were finally ready to see the product that the doctor had been anticipating since he was a young man. "I heard that 2 of your old experiments passed the UA exams recently," his master's voice said through a staticky screen that was located off to the side of his workspace. "You must be quite proud of them?" He turned to the screen and snorted, "HMPH. I'm not so proud of their chosen careers, master," he said, frowning disapprovingly. "I thought the other one would be more inclined to walk the darker path, considering how aggressive he's become," he said, hearing his master laugh from the screen. "One of them I knew was going to be a lost cause considering how much he idolized that hulking buffoon, All Might." The master began to laugh more loudly, a wheeze coming into his voice. "There's still time, my old friend," he said with a hint of amusement. "After all, my spy within this year's crop of students recently informed me of his acceptance into that idiotic school. If all goes according to plan, you may yet have one or both of your experiments back." Breathlessly, Kyudai sighed. "I certainly hope so," pinching the bridge of his nose. "I would do most anything to have them back, of course, but that one boy is dead set on becoming a hero," he said, sitting back with longing in his voice. "His powers are only going to get stronger from this point on. It was blind luck that his quirk hadn't activated before meeting with me the first time." The master questioned, "Quite powerful, is he? I remember you telling me over tea that his parents had the potential to produce quite a unique offspring?" "Oh, my dear old friend," Kyudai joked, "I think you'll find that this boy has quite the surprise in store for us all. Speaking of surprises, did you happen to receive the documents I forwarded to you about Chisaki and his anti-quirk bullets?" Kyudai grinned broadly and sickeningly. "I did, indeed," the instructor replied, "my young apprentice, and I found them quite an interesting read." His tone became raspy. "I involuntarily sucked the life out of my mother the day I was born, but I never actively harmed children. Which is why I'm only working on the refinement," the doctor said, dismissively waving his hand. "I know you don't like the butchery of children, so I would rather keep my hands clean, so to speak." The master remarked, "A wise choice. Let's speak more of our coming operations at UA. How go the enhancements for the Nomu?" he suggested. "Quite well, honestly. The physical enhancements have all been completed to the point that even if the creature didn't have a strength augmentation quirk, it would still be far stronger than anyone at that school save for All Might," Kyudai remarked rather fondly as he continued to discuss the experiment. "At first, I had planned to only integrate 3 separate quirks, but I thought that a few more couldn't hurt," he said, humming in contemplation for a moment. "My apprentice will be pleased to hear that," the instructor laughed. "He's rather looking forward to commanding the beast." The physician was beaming. "As he should," said the individual, "along with the hyper-regeneration, shock absorption, and super strength. I've also taken the liberty of integrating a variation of spear-like bones into the creature. Bone claws." He was grinning broadly as he laughed. "Getting close to this creation of ours will be a tremendous mistake for any heroes that dare to fight it." "Well, we did design this creature with All Might's death in mind," the master said, laughing darkly as he said, "Speaking of design, I was thinking of rewarding our little spy for his efforts at the entrance exams." The doctor said in a kind voice, "Oh ho, what did you have in mind?" The screen began to crackle. "You are aware that the naval laser and optic blast quirks are twin quirks birthed from that plasma blast quirk I obtained some time ago, are you not?" The doctor laughed and said, "But of course, the subject from whom we extracted that particular quirk was rather." The man continued to laugh softly and said, "Shall we say more than a little perturbed about losing his powers?" Wasn't he, though? The wise man laughed. As you are aware, the original quirk allowed the body to metabolize ambient energies such as gamma, X-rays, and stellar energies, into a powerful plasma blast that emanated from all sides of the body? Nodded, yes, quite a magnificent quirk, and continued, as I remember, you had me make copies of it so that we could potentially reward our underlings. He was intrigued by the display, and said, your spy has a limited control over it, considering that little kickback you worked into it. He laughed, that truly was a cruel trick you played on the boy, especially after his parents begged you to help him. With no trace of shame in his voice, the master said, oh, yes, I know, with a dark laugh. But I really couldn't resist, he said. However, since the boy did so well in this first test, I thought about rewarding him with the original quirk. Are you certain? Kyudai frowned at the screen. That particular quirk could prove quite the annoying thorn in the side if he turned against us. I understand your concerns, my friend, the master said with a gleeful laugh. But you have to keep in mind that not only are the boy's parents constantly monitored, but the boy is also a sniveling coward. Ekusumen a week following the entrance exams at UA. With his arms folded in front of his rival, friend, Katsuki declared, I'm telling you, Deku. The sooner we do this, the better. You don't need to be a fucking baby about it. The ashen blonde could see that the boy's eyes were watering profusely, even through his ruby quartz glasses. The verdette whimpered, but I can't just give them all up, I've had them for years. As his friend slowly nodded, Katsuki let out a frustrated sigh and said, you want the bike, don't you? Auntie Inko doesn't have the money for it, so if you really want it, then you gotta bite the bullet and get the money yourself, he said, gesturing around the room. And that means selling your All Might merch. It's all mint. First edition. Izuku threw his head back in desperation and fell to his knees. With his fingers rubbing together, Katsuki screamed, valuable. Worth a lot of money. Enough money to buy that bike. He hauled Izuku to his feet and said, now stop being a total bitch, and help me pack some of this shit up. Izuku yelled back angrily, it's not shit, it's my treasure, which sparked a whole new argument. Inko and Mitsuki were listening with great laughter in the living room of the Midoriya's small apartment. Wow, said the pale blonde woman, to think that Lil Izzy's seriously thinking about selling his All Might collection? Her lip quirked when she noticed her son holding a box and Izuku, who was being dragged across the floor while clutching one of Katsuki's legs. Thank goodness his eyes were closed. I never thought I'd see the day. As she listened to her son's dejected cries, Inko nodded somewhat sorrowfully. I know, and I feel terrible about the reason he's doing it, she sighed. I mean, this wouldn't be necessary if I had pushed for more money during the divorce. Izuku yelled, no, not that. That All Might bust is only one of 5 in the world. Katsuki roared back, oh get over it ya pussy. It's the same stuff they make toilets out of. It is not, Izuku screamed, furiously. Now give it here, Katsuki retorted, bullshit it isn't. No oh. Mitsuki looked at her friend and saw that she was laughing silently, her cheeks puffing out. Terrible, huh? The woman smiled at her friend as Inko shushed her. I think it was pretty mature of him, though, she continued as their sons clashed over what to take. I mean, sure, he could keep it, but what good is a bunch of posters, toys, and whatnot going to do him? She thought. Now that motorcycle he's wanting, that's an investment. Just so he doesn't have to take the train home when he wants to visit me, Inko sniffed. Oh, my baby boy really is leaving, isn't he? Mitsuki grabbed a few tissues from the coffee table's box and gave them to her. This is so hard. Where did all the time go? Inko blubbed before blowing her nose. I hear you, but I can't help but think of this as an opportunity, Mitsuki snorted. Well, think about it. After my brat was born, Masaru and I couldn't even think of having another kid since Katsuki's quirk is so, she said, recalling painful moments when her boy had severely injured her nephew. Ahem, she coughed. Let's just say that we're starting to think about child number 2. She smiled mischievously at her friend, who laughed. It had better be a girl, this time, Inko stated. You were so disappointed when you found out Katsuki was going to be a boy. Thank God we picked out a unisex name, Mitsuki muttered, rolling her eyes. We spent months trying to think of a name for the key before he popped out. No. Not the trading cards. Hand 'em over ya damn uber nerd. But they're gold leaf. WHO cares. Before lifting her eyes to the ceiling and praying, Lord, if you're listening, please bless me with a baby girl. Mitsuki hung her head as the boy's yelling increased in volume. But instead of a beautiful little girl, I got saddled with that, she said, wiping a fake tear from her eye. Oh, come now, Inko said with a low chuckle, Katsuki's come a long way these last few years and you know it. With a scowl, Mitsuki said, duck. Just as an action figure passed over her, Inko lowered her head. As she stood back up, the woman muttered, well, it's still an improvement. Hey, that was my favorite action figure. You're too fucking old to sleep with dolls. He's just being a brat. Right? Mitsuki asked, pointing to the toy, her eyebrows rising as she glanced from the fallen toy to the arguing boys. He doesn't really sleep with any of them, does he? She asked. With a furrowed brow, Inko shook her head and said, oh, no, he hasn't done that in. Had to think about that one, huh? Mitsuki snorted. Honestly, I'd rather I caught him in bed with a girl, Inko muttered as the woman shook her head and rolled her eyes. The scuffling noises persisted. She raised her eyebrows. I swear, Mitsuki, it's been murder. That boy of mine is such a ninny around girls that I'm starting to wonder if I'll ever be a grandmother. Inko grimaced. She knew boys would be boys, but she almost burst into tears when she discovered a full-body spread of midnight tucked under her son's mattress. Mitsuki laughed. Oh, I know what you mean. While clutching her stomach. My boy likes girls well enough. I can tell from all the magazines I found under his bed, she said. But the only girls he would actually be interested in would be one that could literally kick his ass in a straight-up brawl. With a friendly giggle, Inko said, you know, I think I'd like to see that little Katsu getting beaten up by a girl half his size. As the blonde boy emerged from Izuku's room holding multiple boxes, both women chuckled. Deku, I swear to God. He yelled at the boy who was still holding onto his leg, make up your fucking mind. The bike or this useless junk. As he was pulled toward the front door, Izuku whimpered, but these are my treasures, as the boy gazed up at him with tears running from beneath his eyes. As ardent collectors of hero merchandise and All Might memorabilia, Katsuki reminded him, I already sold mine. The blonde bomber had sold his collection the day before when they received their acceptance letters. He was now prepared to buy a motorcycle of his own. He hadn't even cried. Not Bakugo Katsuki. Izuku would always cherish the photo of his best friend sobbing over his misplaced treasures, but no tears. As the two boys staggered to the front door, both women giggled and laughed. Since both boys had agreed to sell their collections, Katsuki was adamant about getting even with them on the merchandise sales at this point, and nothing could stop him. Their blonde-haired trainer was standing on the other side, his hand up, ready to knock, when he reached for and opened the door. Oh, the man said cheerfully, young Bakugo, perfect timing. Oh, hey, Yagi, was Katsuki's friendly, for him, smile that replaced his sneer. Mr. Yagi. The boy cried tearfully as he was startled by Izuku from his place on the floor after the man nodded in greeting. As he staggered back, the man exclaimed, Woke, young Midoriya is on the floor. Why is young Midoriya on the floor? He asked Katsuki, this time with more composure. Please, make him stop. I don't need the bike. Izuku cried as Katsuki cast a disgusted glance down at him. Kachan's making me sell all of my treasures. Oh, no you don't, he yelled, dragging the sobbing teenager past their trainer as a vein pulsed on the ashen blonde's head. I had to sell mine. You're gonna sell yours, he said. As the two left the complex, Toshinori laughed and opened the door. He greeted the two women by saying, I always seem to catch this little home in an uproar, and then asked, what was that all about, anyway? Oh, the boys had their eyes on a couple of beat-up motorcycles, the blonde woman explained casually, and poor little Izuku went on one of his muttering sprees and suggested selling off some of their collectibles. Or all of them in my boy's case, so of course he wanted to keep things fair between them and convinced Izuku to sell his, too. Mitsuki simply laughed, but Inko's face brightened when she saw the man. It was all right when Katsuki sold his stuff the other day, but my poor boy went completely crazy as soon as they started boxing things up. Inko giggled as she invited the man to sit with them, saying, convinced is a very strong word at this point, Mitsuki. I can't imagine a huge fanboy like him wanting to sell off any merchandise like that, Toshinori said with a good laugh as he sat down. Anyway, I wanted to drop by today and let you know that the boys can start moving into the dorms as early as today. Forlornly, Inko squawked, what? So soon? In response to Toshinori's question, Mitsuki shrugged and shook her head, saying, no looking forward to having an empty nest. The man nodded and then returned his focus to the small woman. Ah, he said, never fear, Ms. Midoriya. Izuku will surely visit you as often as he can. If for nothing else than to have his favorite meal prepared, Mitsuki said with a smile as Inko gave her a stern look. At Kusumen the Yaoyorozu estate. As she packed the few possessions she wanted to take to UA, Momo was incredibly excited and enthusiastic. She would finally be able to leave her oppressive life in her family's mansion. Naturally, she couldn't display such joy in front of her family's butlers or maids. They would definitely let her father know how happy she was and how much she wanted to leave him. Without even knocking, one of the staff members said, "Young miss," and the maid bowed. "The furniture that you requested be moved to the dorms has been transported." "Thank you, Sakurai," the young woman said in her phony voice. "I want to get acquainted with the school and its curriculum as quickly as possible. Have my luggage transported next." The maid said, "At once, young miss," and with a click of her fingers, two young men dressed in black took up Momo's luggage. "Also, young miss, the master wishes to speak with you before your departure." After stifling a sense of fear, Momo said, "I will see him now, then," and followed the maid out of her room. She had no regrets about leaving the enormous mansion she had lived in for the past 14 years as they strolled through its halls. Could she? She would be just as much of a prisoner at home as she would be at Tartarus. As she walked into her father's study, the maid announced her arrival and opened the door for her. She discovered him at his desk as usual, pen in hand, signing one document after another. "Ah, good, you've come," he said, pointing to the chair in front of his desk where she was sitting swiftly and elegantly. "I'm told that you wish to leave this evening to familiarize yourself with the campus and its inner workings?" he asked, looking up at her as she entered. The girl said flatly, "I thought it prudent, father. However, if you wish for me to delay my departure." "It is of no consequence," her father said dismissively, shaking his head. "But I must remind you to behave yourself as a member of this house should." Mother said, "Of course, father," and nodded. Her father put down his pen and looked up from his papers. "Make no mistake, dear daughter," he said, his eyes dark and icy, "I have spared no expense for your education. And UA, while hailed as the finest educational facility in the country, is not my first choice for you." "I understand, father," she said, her heart pounding in anticipation of his change of heart. "Yes, as you should, but this is business. It requires that you attend that ridiculous hero school," her father said, putting his fingers together and leaning back in his chair. "And while I find the business itself somewhat distasteful, I would remind you that your efforts to sway the Todoroki boy will have to be exemplary. I will not have that second-rate hero ruffian looking down on us." Momo's forehead furrowed in resolve. "Of course not, father," she said, unwilling to give the giant of a man a bad impression of her. "At least not for a while. Father, could I pose a question?" Her father bowed his head and asked, "Which is?" With a straight face, she asked, "Do you not care for the heroic profession?" As the man's eye twitched just enough to be perceptible. "I apologize if this question is inappropriate, but whenever you bring up Endeavor or any of his coworkers, you've been in a bad mood." "I care very little either way, as it so happens," Ishin said, furrowing his brow. "But, as you know, heroes can be an annoyance for some of our family business ventures. They are simply an annoyance that can be easily rectified by lining the proper pockets," he said, lifting his shoulders. When she had a moment, Momo reminded herself to keep track of which heroes her father had in his pockets, since it would be helpful to have some kind of information about them in case she needed it. "I see," Momo said with a nod of comprehension. "As we are talking about my betrothed," she continued, wearing a faint expression of disgust that she knew her father would overlook, "what if he should continue to show no interest in me?" "I have been assured that his disinterest will not be a problem when the time comes," Ishin said, sharing her disgusted expression. "He will perform his duties without difficulties. Though if he is violent toward you..." Momo's stomach dropped. "He will not remain a man for very long," Momo said, his eyes hardening with pure malice. With a hint of caution, Ishin said, "Just because you are in the hero course does not mean you should neglect your other studies." He seemed pleased with her response, saying, "That should go without saying. Now, as you are about to embark, I will only remind you to remember your manners, and mind your grades. After all, UA's business course is the best in the nation, so if my business endeavor fails, you should be able to enroll in it." Determined, Momo stood up and bowed, saying, "I will not fail you, father." After her father dismissed her, saying, "I'm certain that you will not," she turned to leave the room, saying, "Oh, and Momo." She turned, and he warned her, "Avoid that Tokage girl. She is clearly a negative influence, and I will not allow her behavior to ruin your time at that school." Momo smiled at him and said, "Of course not, father," with a tongue-in-cheek tone. "I will not allow anyone to take me away from our family's objectives." At Kusumen Jiku Medical Center, Kyudai told the prone boy strapped to the examination table, "Now you're going to feel a minor amount of discomfort as the quirk takes root, young man, but that should only last for about 30 minutes. "Bien sûr, monsieur," the young man said, gritted his teeth, I sincerely did not expect Mon Beanfetter to be so pleased with my recent work. He said, I cannot thank you enough for ridding me of that horrible side effect my dazzling beams caused. Oh, but he was quite pleased, the doctor said nonchalantly, adding, and he is looking forward to your continued cooperation during the next phase of our plans. Mais bien sir, the boy uttered. How are my parents doing? Oh, they are quite enjoying their stay, my dear boy, make no mistake, the doctor said, smiling at his concern. He leaned down over the boy and said, but do keep in mind, dear boy, mistakes are what decide if your parents continue to enjoy my master's hospitality. Oh oui monsieur, the boy muttered in fear as he shivered, what is my next assignment? We will get in touch with you about that once your classes begin, the doctor told the young man, straightening and plucking his mustache. But you should try not to draw too much attention to yourself, he said, his tone slightly cautious, because it wouldn't do for you to be pinned as a spy, would it, Mr. Aoyama? Aoyama said, non, it would not, with tears of defiance welling up in his eyes as he swore in silence to free his parents, somehow. Ekusumen a few hours later, in the conference room of UA High School. During a meeting with the faculty about the upcoming term and the arrival of the latest class of first-year students, Principal Nezu, who could be a mouse, a dog, or a small bear, was seated at the head of the table as usual. He was focusing most of his attention on two teachers, Shota Aizawa and Sekijiro Kan, who were the homeroom teachers for classes 1A and 1B, respectively. With a severe expression on his furry face, the mammal stated, I've reviewed the list of students you've requested for this upcoming year. Is there a specific reason why Izuku Midoriya's request was discovered in both of your files? From what I was told in my brief interactions with him, the young man seems to have a pretty good head on his shoulders and he's sharp as a whip to boot, Khan explained, shrugging his big shoulders. I took a liking to the kid. Nezu conceded with a slight nod, I've come to like him a little bit myself. But why do you want him in your class? I want to see what I can do with his combat prowess, the blood hero replied with a sigh. Don't get me wrong, that quirk of his is powerful, but it's more unfortunate that it seems uncontrollable without those glasses Majima made for him, he said, turning to face the support course teacher. Nice work on those, by the way. Thanks, Power Loader said, nodding his head, his voice tinged with pride. I'm just glad my hunch was right about the ruby quartz. He cleared his throat. Right, well, needless to say, he continued, with that much power stored up in his body, and with how much he's capable of releasing, I thought my brand of combat might help him when using his quirk is too dangerous. Comprehensible, but Aizawa could easily do the same with him in his own class, Nezu said with a slight nod. Is there anything else you would like to add to your explanation? The mammal said. Apart from my opinion that the boy is too shy for Aizawa's hazing techniques. I want this kid to do well, Nezu, and I'm worried that if Aizawa gets him, he'll be too harsh with the boy, the man said, gesturing toward the unkempt teacher. With a glance at the man, Aizawa said, I don't believe in coddling my students, Vlad. When was the last time a class, let alone a single student, survived your hazing? I don't, either, Eraser, Khan said, shaking his head and gesturing toward him. He reminded the man, thanks to you, there won't be a 2A class this year. Aizawa sighed. If they're not worth training, then it's irrational to have them at this school at all. You do realize that 2 out of the 20 students we are assigned have been recommended, don't you? Khan scowled at him. At least those 2 students alone should be immune to your harsh methods, regardless of whether you believe the other students are worth training, he demanded. Taking the folder in front of him, Aizawa said, and this kid we're arguing over isn't even one of them. In my opinion, it shouldn't matter if these students were recommended or not, because I refuse to show favoritism to any one student in my class, he said. Eraser. I'm not asking you to be partial. I'm just asking you to behave like a responsible educator. This child has a bright future ahead of him, but if he's placed in your class, Khan yelled. Gentlemen, please, Nezu said softly, raising his paw. If you two keep doing this, we might never accomplish anything. How many of the students on your list meet your standards? He asked, turning to face Aizawa. Honestly, all of them have some form of potential, he muttered as he picked up and opened his folder. However, some of them seem too entitled to me. He turned the page to Izuku's file and muttered, it says here that Midoriya's quirk has been actively gathering up solar energy for the past 10 years before it was able to be of use. He gestured with the file, saying, if his quirk has a limit to how much energy that his body can safely contain, then there's a chance that he could empty his reserves and lose all of that energy if he overuses it. And that's the rationale behind making him a target? Khan insisted. What if he uses up all of his stored power and it takes another 10 years for him to gain enough to use it again? Aizawa scowled at him. Consider it, Vlad. If his body functions as a battery, then that power will eventually run out. The mammal reminded the disheveled teacher before turning to face the newest employee, Toshinori. You've been training the boy for several months now. It's a valid concern, Nezu added. However, even though we don't know if Mr. Midoriya's quirk has a limit to how much power he can unleash, that certainly doesn't mean that he's beyond help. Nezu asked the skinny blonde, what are your thoughts on his capabilities? In all fairness, I wouldn't count the boy out even if his powers did run dry, Toshinori said, leaning back in his chair and glaring at the disheveled teacher. There's also the fact that he doesn't use his quirk at full force often, he said, glaring at him harshly. I know you want your students to go all out in your tests, but doing so with young Midoriya, I think will only result in massive damage. Right, the kid's packing a bazooka behind those eyes of his, Khan reminded everyone. I realize that you think he's not ready to be put into a hero course, Eraser, but leaving him out in the cold like you always do would only make him a bigger target for anyone that wanted to make use of the kid's quirk. Nomori Kayama added, besides, making a slight motion toward the two teachers. You saw how he fought during the exams, she reminded the teacher. I don't know what you're looking for to determine his level of control, but I saw some of those beams of his curve, almost as if he was controlling them, she said. With a nod of agreement, Cementos continued, recalling his fascination with the boy. His beams seemed to be able to ricochet off of any surface, reflective or otherwise. There were also a few moments when I saw him make shots with those beams that should have been impossible. He chuckled and said, after he discovered that little skill, he honed it to extreme levels. The other teachers gave him a curious look. That is something we discovered later in his training, Toshinori added. His quirk can bounce off of nearly anything in order to hit a target. What I mean to say is that he's gained an extreme form of spatial awareness. Even if he doesn't have a direct line of sight, he can see his surroundings and instantly determine how to use his quirk on a target. Khan scowled and glared at Aizawa, saying, he's going to go far, as long as he is permitted to attend this school. Nezu laughed, if you're worried about Aizawa expelling him on the first day as he did with his previous class, then please don't. Aizawa hesitated as the black mammal's gaze met his, due to the backlash we received from not only the media, but also the HPSC. If any students are to be expelled from this school, you must come to me well in advance, and even then I intend to see that the student in question be given a chance to improve before any final decisions are made this time around. Aizawa scowled at the principal and said, I believe that I was permitted to manage my class as I saw fit. And you are, Nezu-sai said in a more reserved manner, however, you must remember that tactics such as yours can easily be seen as negative in the eyes of others. He reminded the individual, keep in mind that this school, while it is hailed as the best hero school in the country, if not the world, we have much to worry about. He continued as he looked at the instructors, the R-rated heroine, Midnight, known for her necessary displays of nudity while using her quirk in her early days as a heroine, has long been a sour point for many that wish their children to be taught here. At the end of the day, I just want to make sure my students are well educated, Midnight said with a smile and a casual hand gesture. Nezu gave a nod, and they are, she replied with a smile. And then there's you, Mr. Aizawa. The man sighed beneath his headscarf. You're practically unknown to world, which is, as I understand, how you like it, but that coupled with the fact that your teaching habits seem harsh and lazy at times, give this school more than enough problems. With a sigh, the man said, that's why you're telling me not to expel any students. All right, fine, I won't just kick them out, he said, before glaring at the mammal. But help me if any one of them proves me right. They're out of this school, and banned from ever trying to enroll in another. With a sigh, Nezu grudgingly said, all right. He took 2 pictures from his vest and said, Momo Yaoyorozu and Shoto Todoroki. He turned to face Aizawa and said, I know they are both in your class, Aizawa, but I would prefer to have them apart. So, there's something I'd like to discuss with you regarding the students from the recommendation exams. Is there a reason why? Curious, the man asked. Indeed, the animal replied. Their fathers have arranged a match between the 2 of them, and I've noticed from my interactions with the 2 of them that neither seem keen on the idea. Arranged marriages may be old-fashioned, the disheveled teacher shrugged, adding, but they are hardly unheard of when it comes to wealthy families. And it's not like this is a quirk marriage, Khan continued. If it were, then I think that Endeavor at least would have picked a partner with a more compatible quirk for his son. He pondered, for example, since his son uses both fire and ice, a partner with telekinetic abilities would have been better than Miss Yaoyorozu. Yes, you are quite right, Vlad, Nezu responded. However, I still think that one of these students should be in your class, Vlad, he went on. While I don't think that they will cause harm to each other, I would rather not take the chance of any altercations in or out of the classrooms. Kan and Aizawa exchanged glances before Kan declared, I want Todoroki. The man said, all right, but that gives you 3 students that were recommended. Give me that Tokage girl. Recalling how well she had done on the tests, he inquired. Kan nodded briefly and said, it sounds like a fair trade. These are students, not trading cards, Snipe whispered from his seat. But are you certain that having them in different classes will be okay? The hero with a steampunk cowboy theme inquired. Nezu responded, I have very little doubt that it will lead to problems with the parents if you're asking if they will be separated. But I find ways to get around it. He got up from his seat and said, now, let's get ready to welcome our new students. He said with a smile, from what I understand, Miss Yaoyorozu has already started to move into the 1A dorm. What a motivated young woman. For Momo Yaoyorozu, it was heaven. As soon as she stepped foot on campus, Mr. Yagi welcomed her back and showed her to the dorm to which she had been assigned. He smiled warmly at her. Mr. Shota Aizawa, also known as Eraser Head, was to teach her in Class 1A, the top heroics class. She had definitely not heard the name from her father, and it was a peculiar title to be known by. Nevertheless, she believed that the man had to be very gifted to teach her homeroom. The girl was thrilled to see her belongings waiting for her in the foyer after being shown to her room and dorm. Since she had only brought a few items from home, she declined Yagi's kind offer of assistance with her belongings and promptly started working. The young woman desired simplicity after leading a life of luxury and confinement. A single bed, barely big enough for 2 people to lie side by side, had been provided for her by the school. She threw herself on top of it with a squeal of delight, awestruck by its texture. At home, her bed was as soft as a cloud and composed of the best materials. She had a constant fear of sinking all the way to the ground. Even though her new bed was cozy and soft, it was somewhat firm. The remainder of the room contained a desk, a small chest of drawers, a small closet, and a lamp on top of her bed. Other than a few clothes, she had not requested anything from home. Whatever other tangible items she might require, her quirk could supply them. She also didn't have many desires. A few decorations, maybe, but nothing too extravagant. In her first 5 years of life, she had had enough of that. Rather, she leapt from the bed and went to the kitchen through the hall. The kitchen was well stocked with food, cookware, and flatware, which delighted her. She got the idea to teach herself to cook after discovering several cookbooks on one of the shelves. Her father's control over maids prevented her from doing such things at home. 4 large couches and a coffee table were arranged in the dorm's living room area, which was in front of a large 75-inch television. Everything was lovely and exactly to her taste. Company was the only thing she was beginning to miss. She told herself, that's your own fault. You wanted to leave as soon as you could, and I'm sure no one else is as eager as I. Surprise! A familiar voice exclaimed as the front doors abruptly flew open, causing Momo to squeal with delight. As the girl ran up and gave her a hug, Setsuna Tokage asked, did you miss me? As Setsuna's slightly forked tongue darted out and tickled her cheek, the girl laughed and said, you have no idea. I didn't know you were moving in so soon. Are you kidding me? Sneered Setsuna, who took a step back and grinned broadly. My house might as well be abandoned. She reminded the girl, adding, my siblings are all in college, and my parents are always busy with work. A little embarrassed, Momo remarked, well, I'm certainly glad that you're here now, adding, I was actually starting to feel just a bit lonely. This made Setsuna laugh. After everything you told me about your home, I'm not surprised, she said, pointing to her bags. Now, how about helping a girl out? She smiled. I didn't bring much, but I wouldn't mind some help in unpacking. Momo was more than willing to assist. Over the course of the following few hours, the 2 girls organized their rooms and put away their belongings. While Setsuna rummaged through magazines for anything that might fit them, Momo even used her quirk to make decorations. As she lay on her bed, the reptilian girl asked, so, did you ever get to meet that green-haired cutie from the exams? No, Momo chuckled, regretfully adding, I've only ever met him twice, and neither time was ideal. Oh yeah? Setsuna rolled her eyes and said, what was so bad about it? She scowled in contemplation and prayed that she and Shoto were in different classes. Well, she said somewhat embarrassingly, the first time was when I was supposed to meet someone else. But Setsuna interpreted her hesitation completely incorrectly. Ooh, do I hear a love triangle forming? She asked, raising her eyebrows suggestively. The girl said, honestly, I wouldn't have anything to do with him if our fathers hadn't. Momo sputtered, God no. She covered her mouth with her hand because she had said too much in front of the other girl. On the other hand, Setsuna had caught it. Momo. What's going on? The girl asked, rolling off the bed and approaching her. Seriously, you can tell me anything. Swear that you won't tell anyone? Momo said, worrying her lip. Cross my heart, she said, making a show of it, and I won't tell anyone. The heiress then sighed and sat down at the desk. My father received an offer from Endeavor several months back, she said. He proposed an arranged marriage with myself and his youngest son. And my father accepted it, Setsuna said, frowning at her but doing nothing to stop her. With a hint of disgust on her face, Setsuna said, Geez, you mean that guy from the recommendation exams? The one with heterochromia, she asked. Momo sighed and nodded, saying, and he's not been subtle in his dislike of me. That's the one. Momo blushed at Setsuna's remark, either that guy likes other guys, or he's just plain blind, stupid, or both. Setsuna blew a raspberry and gestured to the girl, asking, what's to dislike? She said, you're smart, rich, and to top it all off you're drop-dead gorgeous. Momo reflected on the numerous occasions she and her father had argued about Shoto's sexual orientation, but she didn't believe the boy was attracted to men. She explained, and while I believe Endeavor may have earned that hatred, it now extends to me. I think it's most likely because of his father, she said, as Setsuna cocked her head at her. He hates the man. Then why don't you just break things off? Setsuna responded, doesn't your dad want you to be happy? My father? Wanting me to be happy? Momo laughed, uncharacteristically harshly, finding the very idea hysterical. No, he doesn't want me to be happy, he wants Endeavor's money. Momo laughed further, all my life he's ignored me save for a few words in passing, or just to check my progress in my education, and I've been homeschooled for the entirety of my life, Setsuna said, looking at her sympathetically as she noticed tears in the girl's eyes. And when he finally offers to let me attend a public school, you ain't no less, it's only because my betrothed is going to the same school. Hey, come on, Setsuna said calmingly, things will get better. You becoming a hero will give you a chance to get away from all of this. She let out a sob as her friend approached and embraced her. That's what I'm planning, Momo conceded. I love my father, but I can't stand him, she grumbled, if I have to go back to that house, I think I'll lose my mind. The young lady pulled away. You're not going back, Setsuna firmly replied, not if I have any say in the matter. She continued, not only are we going to be the best heroines this school's ever produced, but both my folks are lawyers. Damned good ones, too, so if either Endeavor or your dad try to take you out of here, then they're in for one hell of a rude awakening. At Kusumen it wasn't just Momo and Setsuna who showed up at the school earlier than expected. In fact, a number of students, including those from the sister class across from them, had made the decision to move into the dorms before the start of the school year. She and Setsuna were pleased to meet a number of the girls in Class 1A and had a great relationship with them. Indeed, it appeared that Setsuna had encountered her personality rival. Bright and vivacious, Mina Ishido had a mutation-type quirk that made her grow horns, turning her skin and hair pink and her eyes black in the sclera and golden in the irises. She was the friendliest person either of them had ever met, even by the lizard splitter's standards. She surprised everyone by showing up with a boy who had attended her school. Eijiro Kirishima was a gregarious person who appeared to value manliness highly. In addition, he had sharp teeth that resembled Setsuna's and a striking red head with hair styled in horn-like spikes. When she looked at him, she couldn't tell what his quirk was. Then came a girl who was always see-through due to her invisibility quirk. Like Mina, Toru Hagakure was vivacious and amiable, and the two quickly became friends while chatting about their former schools, particularly the boys. Momo listened, and Setsuna eagerly joined them. Two other girls joined them, including Tsuyu Asui, who had a hybrid mutation quirk that gave her the cutest frog-like appearance. When Momo noticed that she appeared a little tense, she discovered that she was a fairly direct person to speak with. Overall, though, Momo loved her. Then a girl arrived who immediately took a shine to her. A modest girl, Kyoka Jiro had long lobes that jutted out from her ears like jacks. She had deep purple hair with what appeared to be an EKG wave in it. Following their introductions, they immediately began discussing their favorite music. Ochako Uraraka was the final girl to join them. Momo had identified her from the entrance exams as the girl the three boys had saved. She was a straightforward country girl, a little reserved if Momo was to be honest, but judging by the slightly defined muscles on her arms, she appeared to be quite strong. Momo was dreading the arrival of more boys, but when she discovered a young man she knew from some of her father's parties, she was rewarded. A young man from a famous family of heroes. The current Ingenium's younger brother is Tenya Iida. a member of the Iida Speed Hero family. He was as severe as he had been when she had first met him years before. Next up was a boy with bright blonde hair with black highlights that resembled lightning bolts. He introduced himself as Denki Kaminari, and Momo might have misidentified him, but she felt that his gaze stayed on Kyoka a little longer than was appropriate. She would hold off on passing judgment for the time being because he was still courteous and kind to her and everyone else. A boy with broad smiles and rounded elbows then appeared and introduced himself as Honta Zero. He was apparently able to shoot tape from his elbows thanks to his quirk. So far, he was the most amiable member of the group. Then a bigger boy with big lips appeared. When he introduced himself as Rikido Sato, he was a little bashful. The boy had a bodybuilder's appearance. A bow with an avian hybrid mutation followed. The head of a raven belonged to Fumikage Tokiyami, but his quirk was something else entirely. It turned out to be a sentient shadow creature that shared his body. He went off right away to his room with a brief greeting, indicating that he was the kind of person who kept to himself. Another boy named Mashirao Ojiro entered the building after Tokiyami. He had a hybrid mutation that gave him a large, prehensile tail. Mizo Shoji, a multi-armed boy, and Koji Koda, a quiet, bashful giant of a boy, followed him. Even though Momo was still watching for Shoto, she was growing increasingly relieved as their small dorm grew full. There weren't many places left. In order to reach the standard class size of 20, 4 more students had to show up. Observing her uneasiness, Setsuna extended her hand and grasped it. The dinosaur-loving girl said, "He's not going to be part of this class," and Momo looked at her gratefully. "You and I were both in the recommendation exams, and only 2 students from those are put into each class." Momo felt the tension in her shoulders go away. Her friend was correct. Unless there were exceptional circumstances, only 2 students from the recommendation exams were placed in each first-year class. Momo went into the kitchen and brewed several pots of tea for them because she was so relieved by the newcomer and Setsuna's promises. She discovered a wide range of Golden Tips Imperial brands in the cupboards, indicating that the teachers must have had good taste in tea. Her favorite is among them. She was brewing when she heard a loud rumble. No, 2 loud rumbles. Followed by the arrival of another student who was welcomed by her classmates. She heard Setsuna say to the others, "That sound is a Harley Davidson. When it comes to motors, there's no mistaking that." The young heiress was curious and went to one of the windows to see who had come on such a machine. There were 2 of them, just as she had imagined. One is donning a helmet, while the other is not. They both wore riding jackets, but the one with the helmet obscured her view, making it difficult for her to see the one without. When he took off the helmet, a familiar head with fluffy, ashen blonde hair was exposed. Her breath caught in her throat as she thought about the boy she had met all those months ago, his adorably round face and wild green hair. However, there was no way he could also be in her class, was there? No, she couldn't be that lucky. Or might it? After a brief exchange of words, the 2 were sidetracked by an oncoming figure. Another familiar face joined them, and she heard them both laugh. Midoriya had aimed his optic blast quirk at the zero-pointer robot with the assistance of the boy with the pale purple hair. As he welcomed the 2 newcomers, a broad smile split his face. Is it him? Hopefully, she thought. I doubt that boy would be so friendly with anyone else. The 3 boys made their way to the door before she could see his face. She was startled out of the window by Setsuna's voice, "Momo," as if she were a child whose hand was in the cookie jar. Is it him? The girl asked with a knowing smile after giving her a startled look. Momo mumbled in embarrassment, worrying her lip. I think it might be. Her cheeks were getting redder. I didn't get to see his face. Well, come on, then, Setsuna said, pointing to the tea trays that Momo had set out. What better way to greet them than with a freshly brewed cup of tea? Setsuna rolled her eyes and picked up one of the trays, motioning for Momo to follow her. Don't be nervous, okay? With a nod, Momo picked up the other tray and muttered to herself, rather than to Setsuna, I hope I don't make a fool out of myself. Don't worry, she said reassuringly, if something happens, I'll take care of it. Nevertheless, the girl's hearing detected it. When a startled yelp came from the common room, the heiress momentarily pondered how her friend would accomplish that. Ochako was raving about the newcomers when the 2 girls rushed back to check what was wrong. 2 of them were Hitoshi Shinso and Katsuki Bakugo, to whom Ochako was speaking animatedly, expressing a range of emotions from gratitude to embarrassment over their most recent interaction. The teen with the violet hair appeared to be discussing something with Iida, while the person behind them appeared anxious. He wears them to keep his quirk in check. Shinso said to the blue-haired speedster, Look, Iida, was it? Midoriya's not wearing those shades because he wants to. The name made her heart jump up into her throat. Momo thought, ah, Iida must have thought it was rude to wear sunglasses inside. She sighed in frustration as she walked around the couches and placed her tray on the coffee table. He has always valued good manners. Bakugo said menacingly, unless you want him blowing the roof off of this place, then you'd better leave his shades alone. A tiny crackling came from his palms, and he added, and then you'll have me to deal with. As they both got a glimpse of the boy that Momo was so agitated about, Setsuna placed her tray next to Momo's and whispered to her friend, wow, overprotective much? She gave Momo a suggestive elbow to the ribs and said, he's even cuter in person. It's no wonder you fell in love with him. Momo quietly whispered, shish, through the corner of her mouth. Momo readily acknowledged that Izuku had a nice appearance because she had once enjoyed seeing him train at the beach without a shirt on, but he lacked the Adonis flair that some professional male models, or heroes, for that matter, possessed. To be honest, his features were significantly diminished by the glasses he wore. She liked his round childlike face and the little diamond-patterned freckles under his eyes. She couldn't see the true color of his eyes beneath the glasses, though. He's right, Iida, Ochako defended the boy, saying, you saw what he could do during the entrance exams when he trashed that giant robot. With a frog-like croak, Suyu put a finger to her lips and said, no offense, Midoriya, but you don't seem to have a strength quirk. How did he do that? She asked. Having grown accustomed to such assertions, Izuku simply laughed at that. My quirk is called Optic Blast, he explained, pointing to his eyes, and my eyes are the release point. When Mr. Powerloader measured the energy that my quirk releases out, he said it was around 2 gigawatts. He was suddenly inundated with inquiries, which garnered a lot of attention. Momo chose not to think about it and offered tea to her classmates after realizing that she had literally missed her opportunity to greet him. One of the students stood apart from the others with his tea while the others were getting to know one another. Yuga Aoyama was keeping a close eye on the pupils, paying special attention to Midoriya. He thought to himself, his quirk is similar to mine. Could my benefactor have something to do with it? Momo approached him with a charming smile and said, Aoyama, is the tea to your liking? She asked. With his brightest smile, Yuga greeted her with a toast, C'est très bien, mademoiselle, adding, golden tips is one of my papa's favorites. Wonderful, Momo said with a joyful smile. If it's okay with you, may I ask how you have a Japanese name and speak French so well? She said, hoping she wouldn't come across as impolite to the boy. My grandfather immigrated to France when he was young, and married there, said Yuga. I'm only a quarter Japanese on my father's side. I see, that explains quite a bit, Momo said with a nod of comprehension before heading out into the hall. I'm going to see if Tokiyami would like some tea, she said. Ekusumen Lunch Rush was gracious enough to provide the newcomers with a small banquet when evening came. Meeting a hero he admired would normally have sent Izuku into a tailspin, but his thoughts had been elsewhere, or rather, another person. She's here, he muttered to himself as he was packing his things away in his room. I can't believe she's really here, and we're in the same class. His chest tightened as he remembered the lovely girl he had met all those months ago and had barely had the courage to bring flowers to her while she was in the hospital. Now, all of his mother's taunting had been worthwhile. He thought, I wonder if she remembers me, and shook his head, saying, probably not, I'm pretty plain looking. He mumbled as he collapsed back onto his bed, besides, even if she did remember me, she probably wouldn't like me. He clenched his fists in front of him, saying, the guy trying to be a hero who can't even control his quirk. Real attractive, Izuku. And now you're talking to yourself like a weirdo, and slapped himself in the face. Great. When he looked up, he saw Katsuki and Hitoshi Shinso standing in the doorway. Keep acting like that, and she'll never talk to you. You ever hear of knocking, Kachan? Izuku moaned. The blonde simply shrugged and said, it was open, dummy, smiling as he sat down on the bed and said, so, Lil Deku's got the hots for someone? If this is the part where you give me relationship advice, please don't, Izuku grumbled. I'd rather not puke all over my nice new floor. Quite the dynamic you guys have, Hitoshi said with a laugh. He shut the door and took a seat at the desk. So who's caught your eye, Midoriya? He asked, intrigued because he believed that their class was full of pretty girls. When Katsuki said, that'd be Momo Yaoyorozu, the boy flinched. What, you heard of her or something? Katsuki asked. Her, personally, no, Hitoshi shrugged. But her family, damned right I have, he continued. The Yaoyorozus have been a huge name in the business world for about 100 years or so, Izuku said, sitting up and looking surprised. They used to be big into medical advancement and support gear production, but lately, with the current head, I've heard some really shady stuff about him. Izuku, curious to find out anything he could about Momo, inquired, what about Momo? He shrugged again, saying, I didn't even know he had any children since his wife passed away, adding, it was all over the news for a few days. Hitoshi paused, then remarked, I think I saw her in some social media pages a few times, adding, they were taken down years ago, but she looked a lot like Momo. Or Momo looks a lot like her mom, I guess. She sounds like trouble, Deku, Katsuki scowled, saying to his friend, you might want to focus on someone else. I don't think it works like that, Kachan, Izuku scowled, adding, and this is why your dating advice sucks. While Katsuki exploded at the teenager, Hitoshi laughed. High school's first year was beginning to take on an increasingly intriguing appearance.
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, bye bye.